I have spent a lifetime rescuing other people's histories. Today, I rescue my own, and God help anyone who tries to file me away. Mornings in my house use a smell like paper and citrus oil. I kept the library floors waxed the way my father taught me. Broad strokes, slow and sure. My students thought I was quaint. Nancy's friends thought I was obsolete. I let them. A historian knows better than to argue with fashion. You wait, you catalog, you endure. You save the cat. As the screenwriters say, you rescue what matters quietly before the fire spreads. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. On the oak desk sits my fountain pen, blue-black ink, a brass bookmark shaped like an olive branch. I once told an auditorium full of freshmen that civilization begins when we choose a bookmark over a match. They clapped. Nancy rolled her eyes. Lately she laughs with her friends in a way that lands like small coins on a coffin. Bright, careless, final. My son calls me Buddy when he wants something. My daughter brings me an old flip phone as a joke. Dad, you can't even turn on a smartphone. I smiled. I didn't tell her I can still hear a whisper through a wall. There are signs of retreat in this house. An extra suitcase under the bed. A business card from a real estate agent snuck between recipes. Nancy's wine glasses arranged like chess pieces advancing on my side of the board. I brush dust from a first edition and think about how quickly paper ignites. I think about Roman roads and the way you can be conquered not by a legion, but by your own children's impatience. If you're expecting a victim, you misread your syllabus. My knuckles are mapped by chalk, but they close just fine. There is no velvet rope around my dignity. The day it began had no thunder. Only sunlight slanting through blind slats, a pot of tea, and my wife's purse left on the dining chair. I was repairing a loose hinge on the glass front case. Exile comes in hinges, and humming the opening bars of Bach. The phone chimed inside her purse. I wouldn't have looked, but the screen lit through the leather like a theater curtain backlit by fire. A name I knew, our daughter. It began quite literally, with accidentally forgotten phone. How poetic of fate to write in another alphabet while using my language against me. I should have set the purse aside. Instead, I listened. The call had already connected. Nancy must have tapped accept by accident before leaving for her walk. A soft rustle, then my daughter's voice, quick and familiar, the way she used to sound asking for a ride home. Only now it carried ledgers. Mom, we need to move. The agent says we can get above asking if we list by next month. Nancy's voice, he won't notice. He never notices. The historian in me took dictation automatically. Time, tone, motive. You don't survive faculty politics without learning to sort whispers. My heart didn't race. It filed. I set the teapot down on a coaster to avoid a ring. No need to leave traces that weren't mine. On the mantel, the clock ticked a scholar's heartbeat. I thought of every father who kept quiet too long, every king who mistook family for counsel. Then my daughter said the words that made the floor tilt under my shoes. Dad won't notice when we file the papers. He's blind without his glasses. He'll be better off in the nursing home. For a moment I saw my life like a museum exhibit. The kindly professor, the harmless books, the wheelchair ramp they would build to push me out. It was almost funny, the way history repeats, as a farce, then as a signed form. Good, Nancy replied. Let the lawyers handle the signature. He trusts me. He won't even read. I looked at my fountain pen. I thought about how many truces it had written, how many students it had knighted with ink and margin notes. A pen is a weapon, if you respect it. Have you told Michael? My daughter asked. He thinks Dad's declining. Nancy said, crisp as a stapler. We'll say the elite residence is for his own good. The brochure looks dignified. The olive branch bookmark felt heavy in my palm. Somewhere in me, a door unlatched. I have taught revolutions for 40 years. I know the sound a hinge makes before the push. Then we'll sell the library first. Nancy added, quick cash. He'll be flattered someone wants his dusty treasures. A second voice chimed in from the other line. My son Michael, late to his own betrayal. Just tell me where to sign. I didn't flinch. I took the pen, uncapped it, and drew the smallest, straightest line I have ever drawn down my own center. I have been underestimated before. It is the most useful camouflage in the world. Outside, a car door thudded. Footsteps on the porch. The key scraped the lock. The call was still live in my hands, their words hissing like a fuse through the leather purse. I slid the phone out, the screen bright with their names, my reflection ghosted over theirs. I was about to end the call when the front door swung open and Nancy stepped into the library, eyes landing on the purse, on the glowing screen, on me, before her smile froze, and my thumb hovered an inch above end. The screen went dark in my hand, but the echo of their voices stayed, as if the walls themselves had memorized a betrayal. Nancy stood in the doorway, her keys still dangling from her fingers, a paper bag of groceries balanced on her hip. For a second, we looked like the old couple our neighbors thought we were, 60-year partners who shared books, gardens, and evenings of gentle silence. Then her eyes darted to the phone, to the purse, and back to me. "You shouldn't be snooping," she said. Her tone was flat, rehearsed, like a teacher catching a child with crib notes. I placed the phone on the table, without a word. A historian learns. Silence often weighs more than argument. But inside, the hinge I'd felt earlier had swung wide. She crossed the room briskly, set the bag down, and tried to smile. "Arthur, you're overthinking. Elizabeth worries too much. And Michael, well, you know how he dramatizes." I kept my hands folded. Elizabeth sounded very practical, and Michael was eager to sign. Her face tightened, a curtain drawn too fast. "You misheard." "No," I said, steady. For once, I didn't. For the rest of the evening, Nancy busied herself with dishes and phone calls. I returned to my books, though the words blurred. Tacitus once wrote that empires rot within before the walls ever fall. My own household was living proof. The next morning, an envelope arrived from the bank. The return address alone made my stomach knot. I slid it open with the olive branch bookmark, as though the act required ceremony. Inside lay confirmation, my agreement to initiate the sale of my personal library. The shock wasn't that they had dared. It was that they had forged my hand. My signature, copied with shaky elegance, sprawled across the bottom. They underestimated me twice. First as a man too blind to see, then as a professor too old to recognize his own penmanship. Forged signature, I whispered aloud, the phrase sharp and foreign like a scar across parchment. Forged signature. My identity reduced to a crooked line. I took the letter into the library, laid beside the ink-stained blotter, where my real signature lived in countless essays and recommendations. The forgery looked like a counterfeit coin under a collector's lamp. Similar shape, empty weight. I didn't rage. Rage is messy, noisy. Strategy is quiet. That night, Nancy laughed with Elizabeth on the porch, their shadows long in the streetlight. I sat inside and made notes in a leather journal. Dates, details, phrases. If they thought age dulled memory, they had forgotten the historian's craft. Record everything. Days passed with a brittle calm. Michael came by, casual, asking about insurance papers. Elizabeth kissed my cheek too sweetly, her perfume cloying, a cover for conspiracy. I gave them nothing but patience. Let them believe the trap was set. In truth, I was tightening the snare. Then fate delivered its own twist. On a cool afternoon, walking downtown to clear my head, I stopped near the courthouse fountain. A voice, warm and familiar, called my name. Professor Mason? Arthur Mason? I turned. A tall man in a tailored suit, hair silvered at the temples, strode toward me with an expression I'd last seen 40 years ago. Eager, respectful. "James Carver," he said, grasping my hand firmly. "You taught me freshman history. You made me believe the past mattered." He smiled proud. "Now I'm an attorney. And if you ever need legal advice, well, let's just say I owe you. The world is stingy with miracles, but sometimes it pays its debts." I looked into his eyes and saw not just a student, but a weapon fate had slipped into my palm. I gripped his hand tighter. "James," I said, my voice low in the fountain's murmur, "I believe I will take you up on that. For the first time in weeks, my heart did not feel like a relic. It felt like a match. And when I returned home, I found the study door ajar. On my desk lay a manila folder, edges still warm from a hurried hand. The label read, in neat print, "Property sale, full disposition plan." Inside, I glimpsed columns of figures, schedules, signatures not my own, evidence of betrayal laid bare. I lifted the first page, and before I could turn to the next, a floorboard creaked in the hall behind me. The floorboard groaned like a guilty conscience. I didn't turn right away. I wanted them to wonder what I had already seen. The folder in my hands was more than paper. It was the anatomy of betrayal, dissected and labeled. "Arthur?" Nancy's voice floated from the hallway. Too soft, too careful. She stepped into the study, hands empty, eyes scanning the desk like a thief returning to the scene. "I was just looking for this." I held up the folder. The fluorescent lamp cast long shadows across the documents. Property sale, full disposition plan. Interesting bedtime reading. She froze, then forced a smile. "You shouldn't stress yourself with financial details. It's complicated. History is complicated." I said evenly, "This is arithmetic and theft." For a moment her mask slipped, irritation flickering. "Don't be dramatic." I closed the folder gently, as if tucking a corpse back into its coffin. "You forged my signature. Twice now. I've caught you underestimating me. I suggest you stop." Her mouth opened, then shut. She turned on her heel and left without another word, her silence louder than any denial. I sat in the dim room, folder heavy in my lap. The plan was meticulous. Selling the house, liquidating the library, arranging my placement at an elite senior residence. They had left no space for me in the future they designed. No space at all. But a strategist knows. When the enemy reveals their timetable, they reveal their weakness. That week, I called James Carver. We met in his office, a sleek corner room smelling of leather and ambition. He listened as I unfolded the story, page by page, betrayal by betrayal. His expression darkened with every detail. "They think you're powerless," he said finally, tapping the forged signature with his pen. "That's their mistake. Forgery, fraud, coercion. It's not only immoral, it's criminal." I studied him across the desk, the way I used to study young men stumbling through oral exams. Except this one had sharpened into steel. "Then we'll make the truth undeniable," I said. James leaned forward. "Do you want revenge, Professor, or justice?" The question lingered. Perhaps once there had been a difference. Now they look like twins. "Both," I answered. The plan began to take shape that night, as I sat in my library with the tick of the mantel clock keeping time. I was not a soldier, but I knew campaigns. Step by step, act by act, I would turn their scheme against them. And, as if the universe approved, an envelope arrived the next morning from a university. An invitation to give a guest lecture to first years, an honor extended to retired faculty. I ran my hand over the embossed seal. The thought of standing again at a lectern, facing rows of expectant eyes, filled me with something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. The timing was no accident. History itself was telling me, remember who you are before they erase you. The lecture would be more than a return to the classroom. It would be my declaration. And when the evening of the lecture arrived, I stood behind the heavy oak podium, the hall packed, students buzzing with anticipation. The applause began before I spoke a word, loud, insistent, alive. For the first time in months, I saw Nancy's smirk fading in my memory, replaced by a wave of faces that still believed I mattered. I opened my notes, cleared my throat, and thought, let them try to bury me now. Then a familiar voice echoed at the back of the hall, Elizabeth's, sharp and incredulous. "Dad." Elizabeth's voice cut through the applause like a blade. Students turned, murmuring, as she stood framed in the back doorway, her coat still on, her expression a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Dad, what are you doing here?" she demanded, loud enough for the microphone to catch it. I didn't flinch. "Apparently," I said, my voice carrying over the auditorium, reminding young people that history is not written by those who wait quietly to be erased. The students chuckled, and the tension dissolved into a ripple of laughter. Elizabeth hesitated, her cheeks coloring under collective gaze. For the first time, the balance shifted. She was an intruder, not I. Shall we begin? I asked the class, turning away from her. The applause swelled again, drowning her protest. As I spoke, about Rome, about betrayal and legacy, I watched the students lean forward, scribbling notes, their faces bright with curiosity. My words filled the hall like oxygen, and I breathed it in, savoring the reminder. I was not obsolete. I was necessary. Elizabeth slipped out halfway through, her departure a shadow against the doors. But the lecture continued, alive and electric, and when it ended, the students rose in a standing ovation. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, evidence public undeniable, that Arthur Mason was still a man of worth. Afterward, James met me in the lobby. "Brilliant," he said, clasping my shoulder. "You didn't just teach," you testified. I nodded, feeling the energy still thrumming in my veins. Now, they can't claim I'm losing my mind. Not after this. But triumph has a short half-life. That evening at home, I found Nancy waiting in the kitchen. The lights were low, her wine glass nearly empty. "You embarrass Elizabeth," she said flatly. "She embarrassed herself," I replied. "She walked into a lecture hall thinking I'd be ashamed of who I am. She was wrong." Nancy's lips pressed tight, her silence thicker than argument. I could see the calculations in her eyes. Adjust, adapt, press harder. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I searched her purse again, not out of habit, but necessity. That's when I found a manila folder I hadn't finished reading before. Inside was a complete financial breakdown of the scheme. My name appeared nowhere, as if I were already a ghost. The pages reeked of finalities, sale dates, estimated profits, signatures, even projected costs of my residence. They had planned it to the last dollar. I closed the folder slowly, pressing my palm against the paper. Rage tried to rise, but I kept it caged. Rage was their game. Strategy was mine. That night, I set a small digital recorder in the corner of my study, tucked behind a stack of books. It blinked once, red and patient, ready to capture the truth. The next morning, while I brewed coffee, I heard their voices drifting from the study. Nancy's low and commanding, Michael's impatient, Elizabeth sharp. Through with the charade. "The house will be ours in a month. He won't even know what hit him." Michael snorted. "He belongs in that place. He'll have company, nurses, it's perfect." Elizabeth added, coldly efficient, "Let him sit in the nursing home library and pretend. He won't know the difference." The words seared themselves into recorder, into my memory, into history itself. When the conversation ended, I retrieved the device, held it in my palm like an artifact. Evidence. Proof. The kind of primary source I had trained students to trust above all else. That night, James listened to the recording in his office, his eyes narrowing with every word. "This," he said, holding up the small machine like a gavel, "is enough to turn the tide." But before we could act, another blow arrived. A letter from the university, addressed to me in stiff, official prose. They were prepared to offer me a permanent position directing a new historical foundation. Funded by donations, my name attached. A second chance to define my legacy. I should have felt elation. Instead, I felt the weight of a trap closing. Because if the family knew of this, they would strike harder, faster, desperate to cut me out before the ink was dry. I folded the letter, slid it into my jacket pocket, and whispered to the empty room, "You've underestimated the wrong man." Then, just as I locked the study door, I heard the creak of a stair, a soft intake of breath. Elizabeth again, lingering in the shadows. "Dad," she said quietly, almost tenderly, "why don't you just let go? Why make it harder than it has to be?" Elizabeth's voice was honey over glass, sweet on the surface, sharp beneath. She stood halfway down the staircase, one hand on the banister, her eyes gleaming in the half-light. "Let go of what?" I asked, my tone calm, measured. "My home? My library? My life?" She tilted her head, her smile too practiced. "It's not betrayal, Dad. It's transition. You'd be comfortable, safe, We'd take care of everything. I stepped closer, keeping my voice steady. You mistake control for care, and you mistake me for blind. Her smile faltered just a flicker, but enough. She turned, retreating up the stairs. Suit yourself, she muttered. You'll thank us one day. The door to her room clicked shut, leaving me alone with the echo of her words. The next morning, I examined the manila folder again, each page an indictment. Sale price of the house, projected profit margins, even vacation itinerary for Nancy, Michael, and Elizabeth, booked with the money they hadn't yet stolen. My name appeared nowhere, erased as neatly as chalk from a board. It was more than betrayal. It was exile. I slipped the folder into my leather satchel, knowing I would need it soon. Then I sat at the desk, opened my journal, and drafted my counteroffensive. James called later that day. I've scheduled a meeting with a notary, he said. If you're ready, we can secure your estate. Make sure they can't touch it. I agreed, but my plan went further. I wasn't just protecting myself. I was rewriting the narrative. That evening, Nancy came into the study carrying her handbag. She was careless, perhaps thinking me too distracted to notice. But as she set it down, the flap shifted open. Inside, more documents peeked out. When she left the room, I drew the bag closer, careful as a surgeon. Another folder, thicker this time, filled with correspondence between her and the realtor, property appraisals, loan approvals, all of it detailed, precise. They had already plotted the spoils of war. I tucked the folder back before she returned, heart steady. Knowledge was power, and I was gathering plenty. Later, as I shelved books in the library, the recorder still hidden behind its camouflage of leather spines, I heard them again, Nancy, Michael, and Elizabeth. Their voices carried through the half-open door. In a month, Nancy said, the house is ours. He won't even know what happened. Michael laughed. The paperwork's almost done. By the time he notices, he'll already be in the residence. Elizabeth's voice sliced through, cruel and certain. Let him sit in the nursing home. That's where he belongs. He's a relic. Their laughter followed, light and careless. I touched the recorder, felt the weight of the evidence inside. Every word was mine now. History remembers not the conquerors who scheme in whispers, but the one who writes it down. As the door creaked open and their voices faded, I slipped the recorder deeper into the shelf and whispered to the silent books. Bear witness, because soon, very soon, the world would hear them too. The next morning, I rose before dawn. The house was still, the silence broken only by the faint hum of the refrigerator. I carried the recorder to my desk and played back the voices, each phrase as sharp as broken glass. The house will be ours in a month. He belongs in that place. He's a relic. I let the words play again and again, memorizing them like scripture. Then I slid the tiny device into my satchel beside the forged documents. The arsenal was growing. At 10 o'clock, I met James in his office. He listened with the concentration of a surgeon, nodding as the recording filled the room. When the final laugh faded, he leaned back in his chair. This isn't just family betrayal, he said. It's conspiracy. With this, they don't get to paint you as senile. They've convicted themselves. Evidence is one thing, I said quietly. A strategy is another. We need both. James smiled. That's why I was your student. And now your ally. That night, I took the next step. At a discreet notary's office downtown, I signed a new will. My hand was steady, my mind clear. Everything, my home, my books, even a modest savings, would pass to the university to create a historical foundation. But there was a clause, one I dictated carefully. In the event of divorce, the fund would bypass Nancy entirely and go solely to the institution. When the notary asked if I was certain, I looked him in the eye, more certain than I've ever been. I left the office lighter, though the war was far from over. Back at home, dinner was tense. Nancy poured wine, her gaze sharp, searching. Michael fiddled with his phone. Elizabeth picked at her salad. I watched them, noting the silence between their words. They thought the trap was ready to spring. But history favors a patient strategist. When the plates were cleared, I rose slowly and said, I prepared something for all of you. Three heads lifted in unison. Suspicion flickered. I walked to the study, retrieved the bank letter, the folder, and the recorder. I placed them neatly on the dining table, like exhibits in a trial. Nancy frowned. "Arthur, what is this?" "Evidence," I replied. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of centuries. "You wanted me erased. Instead, you've erased yourselves from my trust for my legacy." Elizabeth scoffed. "You don't know what you're saying." I pressed play on the recorder. Their own voices filled the room, cruel and unmistakable. The color drained from Michael's face. Nancy's glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the floor. And I stood there, silent, letting history repeat their verdict. The tape ended, the room heavy with shame and fear. I leaned forward, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "You've underestimated me for the last time." Then I reached for the final page of my will, folded neatly in my pocket, and before I could speak, the front door rattled open. Someone else had arrived. The door swung open with a gust of cold night air. James stepped inside, crisp suit still immaculate from a long day in court. He looked from me to the frozen faces around the dining table, then down at the shattered wine glass bleeding across the hardwood floor. "Am I interrupting?" he asked lightly, though his eyes were already sharp with calculation. "No," I said. "You're right on time." Nancy bristled. "Who is this?" I allowed myself the smallest of smiles. "This is James Carver, one of my students, now an attorney, and, as of this evening, my witness." James placed his briefcase on the table beside the folder of documents. He nodded toward the recorder still blinking red. "Good evening, Mrs. Mason. Michael, Elizabeth, I trust you've all heard yourselves clearly enough." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. "This is a family matter. You don't belong here." James chuckled softly. "Conspiracy, forgery, and fraud? That stopped being a family matter the moment you forged a legal document." The room tightened like a noose. Michael slammed his palm on the table. "You can't prove anything." Without a word, I slid the forged signature across the wood, then tapped the recorder. "I don't need to prove it. You already did." Nancy's composure cracked. Her voice trembled, though she tried to mask it with disdain. "Arthur, this is madness. You're not thinking clearly. You're old, tired. Everyone can see it." James leaned forward, his tone cool and professional. "Funny, I see a man who delivered a flawless lecture yesterday, who captivated a hall of students and colleagues. Hardly the portrait of incompetence." I met Nancy's eyes across the wreckage of dinner. "You wanted me in a home. Instead, I built one where truth lives." I tapped the will in my pocket, and I made sure none of you could touch it. Silence followed, thick and bitter, the kind that precedes collapse. Elizabeth was the first to break. "So what now, Dad? You humiliate us in public? Dragged us through court." Her words were barbed, but there was a tremor underneath. She already knew the answer. I rose slowly, the weight of years falling from my shoulders. "You chose to make me your enemy. I didn't ask for that, but I will finish what you began." James closed his briefcase with a snap. "And I'll make sure the law finishes it with him." Michael muttered something under his breath, but no one listened. Nancy's wine spread across the table, staining the financial papers. I watched the ink bleed and thought of empires dissolving, maps redrawn in spilled blood. It was a fitting image. I turned toward the library. Leaving them at the table, their silence louder than argument, the shelves loomed ahead, patient and eternal. I whispered to them, to the rows of books that had carried me through wars of past. History doesn't forgive betrayal. It records it. And just as I reached for the lamp, a new sound cut the silence, the rustle of another envelope, slid under the front door. The envelope lay on the welcome mat, like a quiet intruder. I bent to pick it up, its weight oddly heavy for such a thin sheet of paper. No return address, only my name written in hurried strokes. Nancy called from the dining room, her voice taut. "What is it, Arthur?" I ignored her. At my desk, under the warm glow of the lamp, I slit the envelope open with the olive branch bookmark. Inside was a single sheet of paper, stamped with the crest of the bank. My stomach tightened before I even read the words. It was confirmation of yet another transaction. This time, authorization for the preliminary sale of the house itself. My forged signature sprawled across the bottom, identical in shape to the one on the library documents. I set the paper down carefully, as though it might bite. Across the room, James read over my shoulder, his jaw tightening. "They're accelerating," he said. "They're desperate." I nodded. Desperation makes people reckless. That's when they expose themselves. The paper trembled slightly in my hand, not from fear, but from resolve. They had struck again, but each blow only armed me further. I carried the document back into the dining room. My family looked up, their faces pale under the chandelier's light. I placed the page in the center of the table. "Another forgery," I said simply. "You've made me a ghost in my own home." But ghosts have long memories. Michael's face flushed. "You're making this bigger than it is. No one's going to believe. They will—" I cut him off. "Because I'll make sure they hear it from your own mouths." I pressed play on the recorder again. Their voices filled the room once more, cruel and careless. Only this time, James stood at my side, his presence undeniable. A witness. Nancy tried to mask her panic with scorn. "Arthur, this performance, it's pitiful. You're trying to turn your own children against their mother." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "No, I'm showing you what betrayal looks like when it's held to the light." Elizabeth looked away, her jaw clenched. Michael muttered curses under his breath. James closed the recorder with a click. "This isn't going away. In fact, the longer you resist, the worse it will be." The room seethed with unspoken fury. For a moment, I thought Michael might leap to his feet, overturn the table. But instead, he stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. "This is insane," he barked. "I'm done." He stormed out, the door slamming behind him. Elizabeth followed, silent, her eyes darting toward me, but never meeting mine. Nancy remained, gripping her wine glass, so tightly I thought it might shatter. When the room finally fell quiet, I spoke softly. "You've already lost. You just don't see it yet." James put a steady hand on my shoulder. "Professor, we have what we need. But if you want to make it undeniable, there's one more step. Take this public. Make them accountable in front of others." I nodded slowly. The thought of exposure had once filled me with dread. Now it felt like salvation. The first public reckoning would come soon. Not in a courtroom, but in a place that belonged to me, a lecture hall, a gathering, a forum where truth could breathe. I turned back to Nancy, who sat rigid in her chair, her lips pale and tight. "The days of whispering are over," I told her. Her eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in years, fear. And in that moment, I knew the next battle would not be fought in silence. It would be fought under the harsh light of an audience, where lies could no longer hide. The auditorium was full again, though this time the air carried a sharper edge. Students, faculty, even a few reporters sat scattered among the rows. Word of my guest lecture had spread, and curiosity had drawn them here. For me, it was more than a lecture. It was the first stage of reckoning. I stood at the podium, notes in hand, but I didn't look down at them. Instead, I let my eyes sweep the crowd. James waited in the wings, arms folded, steady as stone. "History," I began, "isn't just a record of empires rising and falling. It's the story of betrayal, of families turning on their own. And it's the story of what happens when silence ends." A murmur rippled through the hall. From the third row, Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably. She had come, though she looked as though she regretted it already. Nancy sat beside her, her composure brittle, her smile forced. Michael wasn't there, too cowardly or too angry. I continued, voice rising. "Betrayal is not the end of the story. It is the catalyst, the moment when the quiet man, the forgotten man, decides to stand." I glanced toward Elizabeth. Her eyes flickered down. Then, deliberately, I held up the recorder. "I tell my students that primary sources are the lifeblood of truth. Tonight, I'll let you hear one." The click echoed through the hall. Then came the voices, Nancy's sharp and commanding, Michael's mocking. Elizabeth's cold. The house will be ours a month. He belongs in that place. He's a relic. Gasps filled the room. Whispers rose like a tide. Faces turned toward Nancy and Elizabeth, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disgust. Nancy shot to her feet. "This is taken out of context," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Arthur is confused. He's twisting everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. No context changes intent. No editing can disguise contempt. You plotted to erase me, and tonight you erase yourselves." The audience buzzed, phones lifted, screens glowing. Every word was being recorded, shared, immortalized. Nancy's face flushed crimson. Elizabeth tugged at her sleeve, whispering urgently, but the damage was done. The room no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. James stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you just heard is evidence. Evidence of forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. This isn't senility. This is clarity. And this man, Professor Arthur Mason, is very much alive in mind and spirit." The applause that followed was thunderous, a storm breaking over the ruins of their lies. Nancy stumbled toward the aisle, muttering, "This isn't over." Elizabeth followed, pale, her eyes glistening with something between anger and shame. I remained at the podium, breathing in the electricity of the moment. It wasn't victory yet, but it was a first blow landed in public view. When the crowd finally dispersed, James clasped my hand. "You've turned the tide. They can't silence this." I nodded, though in my chest I felt a heavier truth. They would strike back. They would grow more dangerous, more desperate. Betrayal cornered always lashes out harder. And I knew, as I walked back into quiet night, that the next battle would come not with words, but with war at the very heart of my home. The house was colder when I returned, though the thermostat read the same. Silence can change the temperature of a place, and this silence was heavy, deliberate. Nancy's car was in the driveway, Elizabeth's scarf draped across the banister. They were waiting. I set my satchel down by the library door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of old leather and ink steadied me, but the quiet pressed against my chest. Then came the scrape of a chair in the dining room. Nancy emerged first, arms crossed, chin high. Elizabeth followed, her eyes red, though whether from anger or shame I couldn't tell. "You humiliated us," Nancy said. Her voice shook with restrained fury. "In front of strangers, in front of Elizabeth's peers, in front of the truth." I corrected. Elizabeth stepped forward. "Dad, why drag our family through this? You could have let it go. You could have trusted us." "Trusted you?" I let the word hang in the air. "You forged my name. You tried to sell my library. You plotted to bury me alive in a place you could forget about me. And you asked for trust." Nancy's eyes flashed. "You're being dramatic again. You're making us sound like villains." "History doesn't make villains," I said. "Actions do." Elizabeth bit her lip, looking away. But Nancy pressed on, her voice rising. "If you think some cheap recording will save you, you're delusional. People will believe what we tell them. You're confused, unstable, in decline, a man clinging to relevance." I reached into my satchel and withdrew the letter from the university, the one offering me a directorship for the new foundation. I laid it gently on the coffee table between us. "Confused?" I asked softly. "The university thinks otherwise. They trust me to guide a generation. They're building something in my name." "What are you building, Nancy? Lies?" "Paperwork." Her eyes flicked to the letter, then away. For the first time, her posture faltered. Elizabeth whispered, almost pleading, "Why can't you just let us handle things?" "Because you've already shown how you handle them," I answered. "By erasing me." The room crackled with tension. Nancy's hands curled into fists. "You're not going to win, Arthur. We'll find another way. The house, the books, they're ours by right." I stepped closer, meeting her gaze without blinking. "By right? No, by theft. And I've already rewritten the record. Every word, every scheme, preserved. You cannot erase me from history. Nancy, you've already inscribed yourself as a betrayer. For the first time since this began, she had no immediate reply. Her silence was louder than her threats. Then Michael stormed to the front door, his face red, his voice booming. "Enough of this," he shouted. "I'm not letting you ruin everything." He slammed his fist onto the table, rattling the foundation letter, the forged documents, the fragile calm. And in that moment, I knew the confrontation I had been preparing for was no longer a battle of paper and signatures. It was about to turn physical, raw, and merciless. Michael's fist still trembled on the table, rattling the documents like bones in a box. His chest heaved, his eyes wide and wild. For a second, I saw not my son, but a cornered animal. "You think you're clever, old man?" he spat, dragging us through mud, waving papers around, making us look like fools? "You're nothing without us. Nothing." I didn't move. I didn't need to. My stillness was my weapon. "Michael," I said evenly, "you've mistaken inheritance for identity. You think the house and the books make you who you are, but they don't, and they never will." He lunged, hands gripping the edge of the folder, as if he could rip the evidence away by force. James, who had stayed silent in the corner, stepped forward, intercepting him with the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen courtrooms erupt before. "Touch those documents," James warned, "and you add destruction of evidence to your list." Michael sneered, but he hesitated. Elizabeth stood near the staircase, torn, her voice trembling. "Stop it, both of you. This isn't what we wanted." "Not what you wanted?" I cut her off. "Elizabeth, I heard your words. Let him sit in the nursing home. He's a relic. That's exactly what you wanted." Her face crumpled, shame flickering across it before she masked it with anger. "You don't understand, Dad. We were trying to secure your own comfort." I finished. "Yes, I understand perfectly." Nancy, still rigid, finally spoke. "Arthur, you're making a spectacle of this. Our family business doesn't belong in front of lawyers, students, or strangers. You're embarrassing yourself." James laughed once, dry and sharp. "No, Mrs. Mason. He's protecting himself and exposing all of you." Michael turned on him. "Stay out of this. You're just some washed-up student trying to feel important again." James didn't flinch. "Maybe, but I have the law on my side. And your father has history. Both last longer than temper." I stepped between them, my voice low but carrying. "Enough. You wanted me gone, erased, forgotten. But I am still here. And I am stronger now than when this began." Michael's hand twitched like he might strike me, but Elizabeth grabbed his arm, holding him back. Her whisper was urgent, afraid. "Don't. He'll use it against us." The irony almost made me smile. For weeks, they had counted on my weakness. Now, they feared the strength of my record. I gathered the papers, slid them back into my satchel, and looked at each of them in turn. You will not win this war. Not in the courts. Not in the halls of the university. Not in the judgment of the public. Every move you make only writes your downfall. Nancy's eyes burned with fury, but behind it I saw the first flicker of something else. Doubt. "History," I told them, "remembers the betrayers, but it immortalizes the betrayed." I turned toward the library door, James at my side. Michael muttered curses. Elizabeth whispered frantic apologies to herself. Nancy stood rigid as stone. And then, from the hallway, the phone rang, sharp, sudden, slicing through the tension. It was a bank. The ring echoed through the house, shrill and insistent. For a moment, no one moved. Then I crossed the hall and lifted the receiver. "Professor Mason?" a crisp voice asked. "This is Director Harris from First National Bank. I'm calling to verify a transaction request. It seems unusual." I felt Nancy's presence behind me. The air taut as wire. "Go on," I said. "A request was submitted this morning to liquidate a substantial portion of your retirement account. The signature provided. Well, it doesn't match your previous records." My hand tightened around the receiver. Another forgery. Another theft. But this time, they'd overplayed their hand. "I did not authorize it," I said clearly, enunciating each word as though dictating for history. "Block the transaction immediately. Flag every account under my name, and marked this as potential fraud. Yes, sir, the director replied. We'll require a formal statement. Can you come in tomorrow? I'll be there, I said. When I hung up, the silence in the hall was heavier than any words. I turned to face Nancy, Elizabeth, and Michael, each one pale, each one caught in the act without a mask left to hide behind. The bank knows, I said simply. Your scheme is collapsing. Michael's face twisted. You can't stop us. You think one phone call changes everything. Not one, I replied. All of them. Every word recorded. Every forgery exposed. Every witness gathered. You built your plan on lies, and lies don't hold. Elizabeth's voice cracked. Dad, please don't do this. We can fix it, we can still... I raised a hand. Elizabeth, history doesn't erase betrayal. It records it. And so will I. James stepped forward, his briefcase in hand. Tomorrow we take this to the bank, then to court. The net is already closing. Nancy's composure finally broke. You'll regret this, Arthur, she hissed. You'll die alone in that library, clutching your books while the world moves on without you. I smiled faintly, not in cruelty, but in certainty. Better to die among books that never betrayed me than to live surrounded by family who did. Her lips trembled, but no words came. That night, I sat in the library, the recorder and forged paper spread before me like artifacts. The mantel clock ticked, steady and sure. Outside, the house was restless. Footsteps above, murmurs in the kitchen, a door closing too hard. They were unraveling. I dipped my fountain pen into ink and began drafting a letter to university, a personal statement for the foundation, outlining my vision, a sanctuary for truth, for history, for students who believed knowledge mattered more than profit. With each word, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about legacy. As I signed my name at the bottom, the ink dry and crisp and true, I whispered, "No one will ever forge this." Then came a sound that made me set the pen down, a slow, deliberate creak outside the library door. The handle turned. The handle turned slowly, too deliberate to be an accident. I slid the pen into my pocket and closed the folder of documents. The door creaked open, and there stood Michael, his broad frame filling the doorway. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw clenched tight. "We need to talk," he said. His voice carried the edge of someone teetering between anger and desperation. "Talking hasn't been your strength," I replied calmly. "Scheming has." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You think you've won, don't you? A few papers, a stupid recorder, some washed-up lawyer. That's not victory. Dad, that's delusion." I kept my gaze steady. Victory is not about noise, Michael. It's about truth. And the truth is already louder than your lies. He laughed bitterly. Truth doesn't matter. Money does. Control does. And we're younger, stronger. You can't fight us forever. History disagrees. I said, empires always believe their strength will last. They're always wrong. Michael slammed his palm against the bookshelf, making the volumes shudder. Enough with your lectures. You're not in a classroom anymore, you're in our way. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw the frightened boy beneath the fury. The son who once begged me to help him with essays, who once sat proudly in the front row of my own lectures. But that boy was gone, replaced by ambition sharpened into cruelty. I raise you to respect knowledge, I said quietly, but you've chosen greed. That choice defines you, not me. His fists clenched, his shoulders rising. I thought he might strike. Instead, he leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. If you keep pushing this, you'll regret it. Papers get lost. Recordings disappear. Old men trip on stairs. I stared at him until the silence cracked. Thank you, I said evenly. You've just given me one more confession to record. Michael's eyes darted to the bookshelf. Only then did he realize the tiny recorder still blinked red between the volumes. He cursed, ripping it from the shelf, smashing against the desk. The pieces scattered across the floor, like shards of broken trust. But I didn't flinch. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded, One device destroyed doesn't erase what's already been saved. James has copies. And tomorrow, so will the bank. Michael froze. His fury faltered into panic. You can't escape this, I continued. Every move you make only deepens a record. You've already written your own downfall. For a moment, he looked as if he might collapse. Then he turned, storming out of the library, the broken recorder still in his fist. The door slammed behind him, leaving me alone with the silence and the ticking clock. I exhaled slowly, steadying my hands. They were unraveling faster now. Their unity was cracking, fear leaking through the seams. And when fear rules, mistakes multiply. I gathered the surviving papers, locked them in the cabinet, and extinguished the lamp. Tomorrow, the bank would hear everything. And after that, the world. But as I climbed the stairs to my room, a chill swept through me. On the landing stood Elizabeth, her face pale, her hands trembling. "Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't want to be part of this anymore." Elizabeth's whisper lingered in the hallway like a ghost. She clutched the banister, as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Her eyes, red-rimmed and wet, no longer carried the sharpness I'd come to expect. They carried something far rarer in this house. Remorse. "I can't do it anymore," she said, her voice quivering. I didn't think it would go this far. I studied her for a long moment. This was a daughter who once begged me for bedtime stories, who used to sit cross-legged in my library listening to tales of kings and rebels. I searched her face for sincerity, for any sign that this was just another tactic. But what I saw looked raw, fragile, real. "Elizabeth," I said softly, "betrayal doesn't vanish with regret. Words once spoken can't be unsaid." She shook her head quickly. I know. I said terrible things. I let Mom push me. I let Michael." Her voice cracked. I didn't stop them. I didn't stop myself. Her confession hung in the silence, heavier than any argument. "What do you want from me?" I asked. She looked up, tears streaking her cheeks. "A chance to do the right thing now, to stand with you instead of against you." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt the old ache of a father who never wanted war with his children in the first place. "Trust is earned," I said, "and you spent yours carelessly." "I'll prove it," she whispered. "Tomorrow at the bank. I'll tell them what happened. I'll testify if I have to." Downstairs, a door slammed. Michael returning to his fury, or Nancy pacing her next move. Elizabeth flinched, lowering her voice. "Please, Dad, don't shut me out. Let me help you fix this." I placed a hand on the banister, steadying myself as much as her. "If you mean this, if you truly want redemption, then you'll need to do more than speak. You'll need to endure the fallout, the shame, the public truth." "I will," she said quickly, too quickly. But there was fire in her eyes now, not just fear. I nodded once. "Then tomorrow you'll stand beside me." She exhaled shakily, almost a sob, then turned away before her courage faltered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the library, the foundation letter open before me, the weight of legacy pressing on my chest. Betrayal had carved scars deep, but perhaps not for Nancy or Michael, but for Elizabeth, there was still a sliver of redemption. When dawn broke, James arrived, punctual as ever, briefcase in hand. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as history allows," I said. Elizabeth appeared moments later, pale but resolute, her hands clenched at her sides. Nancy and Michael trailed behind, summoned not by loyalty, but by fear of being cut out completely. Together, we drove to the bank. The building loomed like a courthouse, its marble columns glinting in the morning sun. Inside, Director Harris waited, a folder under his arm. "Professor Mason," he greeted me warmly. Then his gaze shifted to Nancy, Michael, and Elizabeth. "And these are the family members in question?" "They are," I said, my voice firm. The conference room was sterile, bright, the kind of place where truth echoed. We took our seats around the long table. Papers were stacked neatly in front of Harris. James sat beside me, calm and ready. Elizabeth glanced at me, then at Harris. She swallowed hard, opened her mouth, and Nancy's hand shot across the table, gripping her wrist like a shackle. "Don't," Nancy hissed. The room froze. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears, torn between fear and resolve. And in that fragile moment, everyone waited to see which history she would choose to write. Elizabeth's wrist trembled under Nancy's grip. For a moment, I thought she might yield, as she always had, folding under her mother's iron will. But then she lifted her chin, eyes wet but fierce, and pulled her hand free. "I'm done being silent," she said. Her voice shook, but the words cut through the room like a blade. Director Harris arched an eyebrow. James leaned forward, pen poised. Elizabeth looked directly at Harris. "My father didn't authorize any of this. The signatures, they're forged. I heard the conversations. I was part of them." She faltered, then forced herself onward. "And I regret it. But the truth is, my mother and brother planned to sell his house, his library, everything, and put him away where he couldn't fight back." The silence that followed was thick, electric. Nancy's face went white, then scarlet. Michael shot to his feet. "You liar. You're just trying to save yourself." Elizabeth turned to him, her voice breaking but unyielding. "No, Michael. I'm trying to save what's left of us." Harris cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "This aligns with the inconsistencies we've already flagged. Mrs. Mason, Mr. Mason, do you have a response?" Nancy leaned forward, her composure cracking. "She's confused. Arthur's confused. They're both." "Confusion doesn't forge signatures," I said firmly. "Confusion doesn't draft property sale contracts. Confusion doesn't laugh about sending a man to a nursing home so you can pocket his estate." James slid the recorder, an intact copy, across the table. "Shall we play it, Director?" Harris nodded. The voices spilled into the sterile room once more, undeniable, unaltered. The venom of my family's betrayal echoed against the walls. Nancy slumped back, silent now. Michael paced like a caged animal, fury radiating off him. Elizabeth sat with her shoulders trembling, but her eyes fixed forward. When the recording ended, Harris closed the folder with a decisive snap. "Professor Mason, rest assured, no transactions will proceed without your explicit consent. We'll also be turning this evidence over to proper authorities." Nancy exhaled sharply, panic creeping into her voice. "Arthur, you can't do this. Think of how it looks. Think of the scandal." I met her gaze steadily. "I have thought of it, and I welcome it. Let the world see who you really are." The words landed like a gavel. As the meeting adjourned, Harris shook my hand with respect, then nodded to James. My legacy was secure, at least in the eyes of the law. But the war wasn't finished. Not yet. Outside, in the bright sunlight, Nancy hissed at me through clenched teeth. "You've destroyed this family." "No," I said, my voice quiet, resolute. "You destroyed it the moment you chose greed over loyalty. I'm just giving history the record it deserves." Michael shoved past me, rage boiling. Elizabeth lingered, tears streaking her cheeks. "I'll stand by you, Dad," she whispered, "no matter what comes next." James clasped my shoulder. "One more reckoning. Arthur, public and final. Then it's over." I looked back at the bank's marble facade, gleaming like judgment itself. And I knew the final confrontation would not happen in a sterile room or hidden library. It would happen in the open, where the world could witness betrayal collapse under its own weight. The last humiliation, the last exposure, the final strike. And I was ready. I have spent my life teaching that history belongs to those who preserve it. Tonight, it belongs to me. The auditorium was packed beyond capacity, the largest crowd I had ever faced. Students lined the aisles, faculty filled the stage wings, reporters hovered with cameras raised. The university called it a founding ceremony for the Mason Historical Foundation. But I knew it was more than that. This was Judgment Day. Nancy, Michael, and Elizabeth sat in the front row, invited by me with handwritten notes they couldn't refuse. Nancy wore her pearls like armor, Michael his scowl like a shield. Elizabeth sat rigid, her hands folded tightly, her eyes darting between me and them. I stepped to the podium. Applause thundered, then subsided into expectant silence. "My family," I began. Once believed they could write me out of my own story. They plotted in whispers, forged my hand, and laughed about consigning me to oblivion. Gasps rippled through the hall. Phones lifted, recording every word. But history, I continued, is not erased so easily. It remembers, it records, and it punishes those who mistake cruelty for cleverness. I lifted a small device, the restored recorder, its files copied and safe. Tonight, you will hear the truth. The voices filled the auditorium. Nancy's icy command, Michael's mocking laughter, Elizabeth's cold dismissal. He's a relic. The house will be ours in a month. He won't even notice when we file the papers. The hall erupted, gasps, murmurs, disgusted whispers. Reporters scribbled, cameras zoomed. Nancy leapt to her feet. This is slander. He's manipulating you. I raised a hand, steady as stone. Manipulation is forgery. Manipulation is betrayal. This, I tapped the recorder, is confession. Michael surged forward, but campus security intercepted him, their presence discreet but firm. Elizabeth covered her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. James stepped onto stage, his voice ringing clear. Ladies and gentlemen, you've now heard what I presented to courts. The estate of Professor Arthur Mason is secure. His will is intact. His foundation protected. What you witnessed tonight is not senility. It is survival. Applause roared like thunder, drowning out Nancy's furious protests. I reached into my jacket and unfolded the university's letter, holding it high. From this day forward, my library and my life's work will serve not greed, but knowledge. The Mason Historical Foundation will preserve the truth, because truth is all that survives betrayal. The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Students cheered, faculty applauded, reporters captured every second. Nancy stood paralyzed, her face drained of power. Michael pulled at her arm, urging retreat. Elizabeth sat broken, whispering through her tears, "I'm sorry, Dad." I met her eyes, and for the first time, I saw sincerity. Perhaps not redemption, but a beginning. When applause finally ebbed, I stepped back from the podium. Behind me, a plaque was unveiled, the Mason Historical Foundation, in honor of Professor Arthur Mason, a man who could not be erased. I looked at it, and in its bronze reflection, I saw myself not as a victim, but as the architect of my own legacy. The hall lights glowed warm, brighter than any fire, and I felt the weight of vengeance melt into something greater, vindication. Nancy's voice, once sharp enough to cut, was swallowed by the crowd. Michael's fists, once ready to strike, hung useless at his sides. They had lost not just my house or my library, they had lost their masks. I stood taller, my hand resting on the podium, my fountain pen in my pocket, the olive branch bookmark tucked in my breast pocket like a medal. And as the ovation swelled one last time, I allowed myself a smile, calm, certain, unbreakable. They had tried to write me out. Instead, I had written the final chapter, and history, as always, was on my side. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.